are you? How did you even get in here? Get out of my house now!
I'm a tracker, and I have been sent to spy on your browsing activity.
What?
Have you met my associates?
Your associates? Ooh, are those your card details? Go away, stop looking! Hold the phone, is that Puppet Hub?
It certainly is. Let's write that down for extortion later.
It's not, go away, why can't I just have privacy online?
He's even using an incognito tab. Everyone loves being tracked online, which is why you should never get NordVPN. You don't need their double encryption that makes it impossible for us to track you and blocks our precious malware, nor their threat protection, which scans files before you download them and blocks any threats before they can harm your device. So don't go to nordvpn.com/mortismedia to get a huge discount off the 2-year plan with 4 additional months for free. Link not in the description, obviously. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the hackers take control.
Me and my friend took up the hobby of exploring abandoned buildings and urban exploring in our free time, because we found it fun and interesting. We are from Long Island, New York, where MS-13, the deadliest street gang in America, mainly operates out of some of the towns here. I was browsing around the internet for nearby places to explore for fun when I came around to the Pilgrim State Psychiatric Center in Brentwood, New York. We didn't put much thought into it and just went. We parked in the parking lot a good distance away and started to walk through the woods to get there. I had done this before with other places and had never had this strange feeling occur before. Just the walk over, I felt uneasy. There was trash everywhere and dirt mounds which seemed like they would have been dug up. We finally came to the building, which was conveniently easy to enter. When we entered, we were greeted by dirt mattresses that seemed to have been placed there for a reason. We didn't comment to each other about how we felt because we didn't want to appear wimpy. We went through the entire building seeing many mattresses and old shoes. When we got to the top, of course it had just gotten dark, and we had a long walk back out once we left. We get to the bottom of the building and lost our way. The only way out was walking over a plank over an abyss, but that wasn't the bad part. We crawled through a window and started walking along the road to get back to my car, when 2 cops see us while we're driving and come over to talk to us. You really shouldn't be going in there after dark, and they let us go. We laughed it off and got back to the car. My friend called his cousin to tell him about what we did, and he told us that MS-13 operates out of there and that we're lucky to even be alive. I look up Pilgrim State murder, and sure as hell I see that multiple teens have been murdered there in the woods where we were initially. Cops had dug and searched the woods before to find missing teenagers, so I connected the dots between that and the mounds I saw. I went to bed that night shaking about the thought that I could have been killed for entering their territory. If you want, you can look up Pilgrim State MS-13 Brentwood or something. I'm lucky to be alive. I found an abandoned bomb shelter. It wasn't so much abandoned as it was locked up and hidden by piles of rubbish and rubble from construction. I had noticed it numerous times, but it was always locked shut. Then one day the gate was ajar and I decided to check it out. 9-year-old me wasn't smart. The stairwell was dark and there was barely any light. This was before mobile phones and I didn't have a torch, so I got several stairs down before my feet started to get wet. When all at once I was surrounded by black water. I think there were snakes or something in the water because I felt something on my ankle, and I noped out of there real fast and made an excuse as to why I was wet and smelled really bad. This was China, by the way, and I just lied and said it was a puddle or something. Still gives me the creeps whenever I remember it. In Oakland, I once broke into a built-out warehouse that once belonged to an urban survivalist. It was abandoned, then turned into a drug den. then abandoned again. Tons of used needles littered the floor. I even found a box of fresh needles in a hidden compartment in a wall. All of the doors had crazy reinforcing with pipes angled into the floor. There were secret doors and hidden compartments all over. A large staircase with a huge hatched door blocking the top, capable of being closed from the first floor via pulleys and cables that led to the mezzanine. 2 giant initials were painted in red on the wall, SS, which probably stood for super secret, because there were secret rooms hidden behind the wall. One hidden room, which was only accessible from the other hidden room, was built with studs spaced 6 inches apart, and it was lockable from the outside with no handle on the inside. How cozy. There were rumors of a tunnel that led under the busy street in front of the warehouse, but I never found it. Although I didn't try that hard. The place was eerie as hell. I was working security in downtown Kansas City. I went to the basement of the building that I was currently watching and was poking around being curious when I came across a door leading to the outside, which was odd because as far as I could tell I was underground. Come to find out, they raised the streets in downtown Kansas City by about 12 feet, and this door led to the catacombs beneath the streets that are still connected to a large amount of downtown. I wandered around a bit and there was nothing really much to see, but the sides of the buildings and things like that, until I walked up to the bank, which had its own little door. I didn't even try the handle. I figured every alarm known to man would go off, and I would shortly thereafter be running for my life because someone would have probably thought I was trying to rob it. Working as a graveyard shift security, I often came across big empty buildings and giant abandoned safes, or even whole abandoned giant factories that I had to occasionally patrol to make sure hobos weren't getting in. If you like to urban explore, being a security guard might be the job for you. Me and a few friends broke into an abandoned building in Flint, Michigan. It was a tower that was set to be destroyed a few weeks later, so we just explored it. The building felt like something you'd find in a post-apocalyptic world. Everything of importance had been stripped away. Only rotting junk had been left behind to be destroyed. It was the dead of night, and we didn't want to get caught, so we had to be super careful about our light usage, but that made things super eerie. It was even more creepy because we found a purple hat with a feather on it. We discarded it, and when we were leaving, the hat reappeared on the staircase in front of us. As you can imagine, we got out of there fast. I am an avid and experienced urban explorer. I have visited many different abandoned sites. The place I'm talking about has been explored several times by others since, but when I visited it wasn't a common knowledge location, and all the buildings were still intact except for the main house, which had, from what I had heard, burnt, leaving nothing but the outer stone wall. Nothing but the outer wall remains, and all the other buildings were torn down since I was there. To the more recent urban explorer, it is known as the Stone Castle, and is more recently known as the Ulster Castle. When my boyfriend at the time discovered it, he saw it in the distance from a roof he was working on in Ottawa, Medonte, Ontario, but it's not there anymore. A large barn, a carriage house, and towards the back of the property a stable. The first weekend we both had off, and we made the hour-long drive to explore it. The property was absolutely stunning. On the top of a hill, back from the road, you could almost imagine living surrounded by such beauty, and we did exactly that. The house itself was gone, except the wall. If you looked at the basement window, you could see an old stove laying among the wreckage. It could have been a beautiful home at one time, to whoever owned it. Being the explorer I was, I insisted that we investigate every single corner of every building. That was on the property, and although my ex was less enthusiastic about it, I insisted. I honestly did not see the point of driving for an hour just to look at the outside of the building. No, I had to go in them. The first building we explored was the barn, both upstairs and down. Down in the basement of the barn is where things went from wow to holy crap really fast. It had been used as a place for satanic sacrifices. There was satanic artwork, a knife that appeared to have blood on it, and an altar with black candles and a bottle of what smelled like blood. The most disturbing piece was that whatever satanic group was using it, they had built a makeshift cage out of the cider with chains inside and everything. My boyfriend at the time wanted to get the hell out of there as quickly as possible, but I convinced him to stay so we could explore the rest of the buildings on the property. I said it was probably just a bunch of kids screwing around and not a big deal. Our next stop was the stables at the back of the property, and honestly I was so caught up in my love for exploring that he would not have been able to persuade me to leave without going in every single one no matter what. I opened the door to the stable and the smell hit me. Rotting flesh. And the entire room was littered with animal corpses, dogs, cats, rabbits, even coyotes and foxes that had been horribly mutilated. It was absolutely the worst thing I've ever laid my eyes on. As soon as my boyfriend saw it, he grabbed me and said that we were leaving right at that moment, and that killing animals is not stupid kids doing stupid things, it was serious. So we started to leave, but there was one more building. I wanted to check out the carriage house. He said there was no way he was going in there and stomped off up the hill to the main house, assuming I would follow. But I didn't. I went around the hill by myself, took a quick peek in the carriage house, and it was anticlimactic with nothing in it. It was actually a good thing that I snuck off like I did, because if I hadn't, we wouldn't have seen them coming. They would have been able to sneak up on us as we were coming up the hill and do God knows what. The first one I noticed was an adult male with a baseball bat. He actually had opened our car door and was rifling through things in our car trying to find a key. There were about 8 people in total in the group, ranging from adults, I would say in their 30s, to teenagers and children. They all had weapons, be it golf clubs, sticks, a cane, or baseball bat. I yelled at the guy what the hell he was doing going through my car, and my boyfriend came charging over the hill. Bless his heart, he went right through the posse of creeps and weirdos who seemed to be lying in wait for us. It appeared we had ruined whatever plans they had, because immediately they backed off. Some even tried to hide their weapons behind their backs, which was just stupid. Baseball bat guy demanded to know what we were doing there, and I demanded to know what the hell he thought he was doing to our car. He didn't answer. He just looked at me all nervously. My ex-boyfriend said we were admiring the architecture of the house and that we were just leaving, and they let us get into our car and drove off, which in itself was a miracle. I'd say in light of what we had discovered on the property, they followed us in a black pickup with no plates for a good 20 minutes instead of heading home. We went to the closest city, which was Barry, filed a police report who seemed more shaken than us and headed home. My ex never went back to the roofing job again. He had someone else finish it and went to another one. I wanted to go back, but after telling people what happened, I couldn't find anyone to go with me. My ex and I continued various explorations, but we both started carrying knives. I still do, even when I hike. I have not read of anyone else having similar experiences at Satan's Castle. Recently, my cousin, who is also an explorer, contacted me with a place she wants to explore. Guess where? Guess what? We've made arrangements to go there in the next few weeks. So on that note, and many years later, Satan Castle Cult, I hope we don't meet again. My dad has a house in the mountains of upstate New York that he bought in the early 2000s. We still lived in the suburbs of Westchester, so we would go up and stay at his house on weekends while my dad did his best to fix it up. When I was little, I was into paintball and from the city, so I was always shooting up things in the woods. Next to my dad's house in the woods was this house that was falling apart. I could see it in the distance from my bedroom window, and it always gave me the creeps. Half the ceiling was caved in and it was fully furnished, and an old Ford Fairlane still in the driveway, but everything was completely rotting. One time my cousin came up that weekend and we took the paintball guns and went out to shoot up in the woods as usual. We walked over to the old decrepit house and thought it would be fun to shoot at the windows, so we did. We continued to find things to shoot up and went back inside to play Grand Theft Auto 3. The next weekend I went up, but didn't visit the abandoned house. The weekend after that my cousin came with me again, So we went up with the paintball guns, walked towards the old house, and the windows weren't broken anymore. They were still full of cobwebs and pollen. My cousin and I were confused as hell, so we shot at them again, and we stopped going there for a few months after that, and by that time the house had been demolished. I still can't explain how the windows either fixed themselves or like it never happened. When I've talked to people about it, they suggested that maybe the owner had replaced them, but as I said, they were full of cobwebs, and who would replace windows to a house with no ceilings before it got demolished? In high school, in Mesa, Arizona, there was a mansion that was rumored to be haunted. It was built in the back of a neighborhood surrounded by citrus trees, with fully paved roads but not a single other house built. I'd gone there in big groups of 20+ people, and there was always an eerie feeling, but nothing specific happened, although a girl broke her arm there once, but that's a different story. Well, one night, we were bored and decided to go with only 6 of us. The house was in the middle of a giant island in the middle of a cul-de-sac, so we parked in the back to hide our car. We walked through the citrus trees towards the house and soon heard rustling in the trees behind us. I kept turning around to see if someone was following us, and we finally saw it was a few javelinas. They aren't very aggressive, but it definitely spooked us. So we get to the house, and there's a light on inside. We've never seen a light on, so 4 of the 6 of us refused to get any closer, but 2 snuck up and looked in the window. The first windows we looked in, the lights were off, but light spilled in from the next room over, so we sneaked to the next window and peek in. The lights were off in this room too, but the lights were spilling in from the room, so we had to look at, and we ended up circling the house and couldn't find the origin of the light or evidence of anything inside. We talked to the others into going into the backyard and sitting by the pool and telling ghost stories, and after a few stories on the other side of the pool, there was a 1950s style radio. When we had been there in larger groups, we would always try to get it to turn on but never could. In the middle of my friend's story, the radio turned on static. We all turned to look at the radio for about 10 seconds, and then it turned off again. By this time we were seriously spooked and decided to leave. As we walked through the backyard to the citrus trees, we walked up the racquetball court. It was halfway buried in the ground, and there were stairs up to the roof, which was about 8 feet off the ground. We walked back and looked over the orange groves to see our car on the other side. One of my friends turned to look at the house and suddenly froze. "Don't turn around." Of course, we all turned to face the house. I couldn't see anything. "What?" I asked. "Look in the house." On the first floor facing the pool were 2 glass French doors, and standing inside was the dark silhouette of a man looking at us. He didn't move, just stood there watching. We counted to 5 and all jumped off the roof and ran through the orange trees to our car. To this day, I have no idea what that was in the door. The biggest cork factory in Portugal opened in 1905 by the name of Mundet and Sons. It was truly amazing. People ate, slept, and made their lives inside the factory's headquarters, which employed a lot of women and was a sure sign of the times changing ahead. Then the work conditions began to go downhill. A lot of people lost body parts due to unsafe cork cutting with enormous razor-sharp blades that were everywhere. Some people even died. In the 50s, a medical center was built to help those in need near the factory. This alone led to an improvement in all ways. The work conditions also began to increase, and later, in 1986, the factory's owner, Paula Mundet, also known as Cork Queen, was brutally killed by her own lover, who cut her body to shreds. The gruesome murder, alongside the decline of the cork industry, led to her son Joseph closing its doors in 1988. In the 90s, the place was heavily guarded by armed security guards, but they began speaking of a werewolf in the vault area, and by the 2000s the night shift positions were abandoned. Only video cameras registered the nocturnal events. Guards would work there from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. at best, and this alone gave room for a lot of teens to try and go in there. Exploring abandoned places started to become popular, and a friend of mine actually found money, guns, and a lot of other valuable items they later sold. With this, they started to get comfortable taking pics in there by 2005. Some pictures were disturbing. In one of them was a distorted girl's face seen in the reflection through glass. Bear in mind these were street kids and they had no clue what was happening. They began experiencing some events, seeing apparitions, hearing voices in the vault area, and they later talked with elderly folk from the town who had worked there. Most of them had lacked fingers in their hands. One day, some years later, police entered and arrested them, gun in hand, I suppose to stop them going in there. All were not arrested, but some had to spend the night, hidden under some old staircase or old machinery. Now, this is my account. In 2005, I was becoming friends with one of the boys who entered the Mundet factory. One night, I expressed my desire to go, but I wish I hadn't. We entered through some construction work path. I remember I got spooked when I entered the main gate by the side, and it was closed shut, of course. My brother was there too. He's younger, but loved exploring these places, and it calmed me a bit. It was just us three dudes, entering a giant locked compound with a soap camera to capture evidence. I was not thinking about ghosts much, more about the factory stopped in time. This street looked like it was from a Hollywood scene from the 50s. Our friend had some old keys, which I assume he took from the vault. Some still opened locks. As we entered a few buildings, as we went further into the darkness, we started to listen to the sound of working machines. At the same time, my brother snapped a pic, and there was a big mist forming from where the sound was coming from. We moved, capturing mists and colourful orbs, listening to the rattle of machinery. I saw someone at a window just looking at us. We ran out of there and into the balnearis. Then we listened to footsteps coming closer. All of us got ready for the police, but they stopped right at the door. And there was no one there. We decided to hang out there for a while more, and then we saw that the window where the man was had no floor. It was impossible for someone to be there at all. We ran out of there. It started becoming too much. We returned 2 days later, just me and my brother, and we didn't even get past where we were the first time. Our infrared sensor gave readings through the roof and shut down as we saw 2 giant orbs with our bare eyes. We went back some days later with our friend to go to the red zone, which is where the supposed worst event happened. It was stagnated, with signed papers from the 1980s, machines rustling, roofs falling. All this in complete darkness as we explored the basements. Farps were falling from the roof and bats were flying around. But we stood our ground, and not much happened that night. Not much we noticed anyway. I was baffled by all that. It was strange to notice how the other boys that weren't there in the early 2000s were now afraid of entering. We went back a few times with more than 10 people and experienced some minor things, but never had the courage to stay there long. Nowadays, it's being demolished. It's sad but needed. The place was falling apart quickly. Well, one night we were there, and the other day the roof had collapsed exactly where we had stood. We weren't allowed there anymore, and a homeless man recently died in there, so it was probably best to be avoided. Paula Mundet is said to still haunt the mansion where she was assassinated in Sintra, a well-known hotspot for paranormal events. My friends and I loved to urban explore around our hometown of New Orleans, in high school/early college, and by that, I mean we'd just hop in the car and drive with no destination and end up somewhere interesting looking, then get out and walk around. I've got a few stories, but this one stands out in my mind. One night, a friend of a friend took us to a secret beach, which required walking over a hill past these train tracks. then through a small patch of wood. It was a small, sandy beach with overturned trees as benches. It had a view of the Mississippi River, and you could watch the large riverboats running up and down it. There were signs of people having been back there at some point. There was trash scattered about, but we thought it was so cool, and we started a little fire pit out there and everything. He then told us about a ship graveyard that was a short hike through the woods. He showed us the way, and it was so neat. You trekked through this footpath, then climbed up this large dirt hill with giant metal pieces jutting out of it to get to the main attraction. It was basically the corpses of old ships in all manner of positions, as well as multitudes of old and large shipping crates. It seemed maybe, at one point, it was some kind of docking station, but had since been long abandoned. In the dead center of it was a small building, and it looked as if it had been an office or something. Then there was a large metal structure made of tubes near the huge overturned ship. Like the ship had sunk into the mud, at the front end, was sticking out straight into the sky. It was wild. We walked around and noticed that some of the crates were open, but none of us went to look inside. There was also graffiti on some of them, plus the building in the middle, which read The Rabbit Hole, and had a bunny tagged on it. After maybe half hour of walking around, we climbed out of the ship graveyard, walked back to the secret beach, smoked a few cigarettes, and then went home. A few months later, a tropical storm hit. The following weekend, I wanted to impress this girl I liked at the time, and suggested our group of friends hanging out that night and going back to the beach, since most of them hadn't seen it. We went back and it was almost totally reconstructed just from the tropical storm. The log seats were moved about, the fire pit we had built was gone, and the path to the ship graveyard was a mess of debris and fallen trees. We hung out on the beach and I asked the group if they wanted to see the ship graveyard. We had to take a weird alternative route through the woods from the normal path, because the main footpath was still flooded over. We got to the back and climbed up the dirt hill. It was a trek. It was sloppy and muddy, and the metal struts to climb in were sliding around. It was much more difficult than before, but we made it to the other side and everyone was astounded, and we walked around a bit. We found these giant fire extinguishers, and they worked. We sprayed them around and they were loud. We ended up walking over to the rabbit hole building, and one of my friends climbed to the roof to see if there was a way inside. Almost as soon as he reached the top, he quickly scaled down and came back around and whispered, "Someone is back here with us," and pointed towards the large metal tube structure next to the overturned ship. And sure enough, there was. Someone tall, large, rocking back and forth on the tube structure. Then we noticed there was a blanket or something hanging from the ship, as if he had climbed up and was squatting there. The girl I was trying to impress suddenly became very unimpressed, and we made our way back down the dirt hill. We turned around, and both the person and the blanket were gone. We proceeded to freak the hell out, and started to move faster. As we got to the top of the hill, I could see him walking past the rabbit hole. A few of us got cuts and scrapes trying to climb the metal structure in the mud, but we were in such a panic we didn't notice until later. We went the original way we came, away from the footpath, and I don't think any of us had ever felt a walk take that long to get back. We only whispered to each other as we moved, and when we got back to the beach, we took off past the train tracks, got to my car and peeled off. To this day, I'm not sure who was back there or why they were silently following us out, but it was definitely terrifying. The same suburban area where my family lived, there was a really old abandoned 3-story building, a few houses from ours. It was a local hotspot for teenagers and other young kids to go explore the scary old building. Me and my friends had explored it many times, mostly just the yard since the house owner still owned it and took care of it. By that, the owner just locked all the doors and windows whenever someone broke into it. But one day me and 3 of my friends wanted some excitement, and we figured we should go to the house for old time's sake in the middle of the night. So we did. We went to the house, and I'm not sure if it was just the feeling of an abandoned building, but something already felt off in my head. But I feel that in a lot of places, so I didn't think much about it. We then tried to open the door, but it seemed to be locked or stuck, since we tried pulling and pulling, but it didn't open. Then my other friend tried kicking the door in. He managed to get his foot through the door, making a hole in it. We then reached through the hole and opened the door from the other side. It had a weird mechanism or something, but we got it open and went in. The rooms were quite small, even though there was a lot of rooms, and it had a basement and a middle floor and an upstairs. We explored and chatted and explored it for old time's sake. It was about 1 a.m. when it started to rain. We thought we should stay in from the rain. We were in an upstairs kind of living room, so we sat down on the floor instead of the old molded couch, because who would do that? We were chatting about Clash Royale until we heard a sound coming from downstairs. Distinctly, the noise of a floorboard creaking. Me and the others all got silent and confused about it, and then, when we watched each other in silence, we heard another creak and something falling on the ground. When we looked at each other, with wide open eyes, scared what to do, I managed to stretch myself to look down from the stairs with my head hidden. I didn't see anything but noticed that a table had fallen over in the kitchen area. I then told my friends that it was just the wind. It knocked down the table in the kitchen, and we all chuckled from the jump scare. We then stood up and got ready to go downstairs, but before we could even reach the first step, we heard someone running and dashing from the back door outside. One of my friends got scared from it so much he almost fell. It's still funny to this day, you should have seen his face. But in all seriousness, we got confused and frightened and decided to book it to the front door. We ran half a block to our friend's house and didn't see or notice anything on the way back, except that the back door was almost off its hinges in the backyard. It was a strange happening, but we didn't think much about it. Maybe just another teen trying to explore and got scared and ran away. Then a few days go by, and a friend of the group in the house noticed something interesting in the newspaper. That a local drug-addicted homeless man had been found and taken to custody. The man had been living in that abandoned house and used it for drug deals and shelters. Now I don't know what would have happened if we didn't hear his sounds and went downstairs with him there. And I still think about it sometimes. Exactly what would have happened if we'd have been down there with this drug-addicted homeless man? Might he have tried to rob us, or do something far worse in one of his whacked-out states? I'm glad we never found out.
11 years ago, a couple was arrested for hoarding animals, mostly dogs. The authorities entered their large home to find over 100 sick and emaciated dogs with dead ones strewn around and stacked in the sinks and bathtubs. The floors were so soaked in urine that the police had to wear respirators and hazmat suits to enter. The house was immediately condemned and left as it was. I grew up around the area and had heard about this story. However, I only knew what the news articles stated. The husband was a doctor, the wife was his receptionist. Over 100 dogs were rescued while others were deceased inside the home. The condition of the house was poor. There were no pictures of the couple or follow-up of the arrests. I'd never thought I'd come to know as much as I do now. I love exploring abandoned buildings, particularly ones with a dark history. However, I'm also an animal lover. I wasn't sure if I wanted to enter this house. I also couldn't find it for a while as it's in dense woods, because I was unsure if the deceased animals were left inside. 9 years after this incident occurred, I finally decided to explore it. I've been in places where horrible things have happened, and I'll admit I've never been as disturbed as I was in this mansion. Upon entering the area, the first thing I noticed was how large the property was. I know now it's over 40 acres. The mansion itself was a decent size too, but the outside was nothing impressive. It was a drab brown colour with shingles falling off and boards over every window. In the distance I could see a lifelike sized dollhouse, much fancier than the house standing before me. I thought to myself they must have had kids. Luckily for me, the front door stood wide open, and I walked in, crunching some glass as I stepped, and as my eyes adjusted, I realized that the room before me was very colourful. The floors were cluttered, and it was obvious that the house had had its fair share of vandals. The walls were bizarre colours, sometimes mixed with old floral wallpaper, and there was a faint smell of urine, but other than that, no sign of dogs. All of the family's possessions were left, thrown around no doubt by the vandals, who didn't seem to have taken much. Interestingly, the power was still working. I found a lamp, powered on, and tossed it on the floor. The wife had a large amount of clothes, mostly with the tags attached. They seemed to have at least one daughter, whose many rooms were filled with every toy imaginable. I noticed a trend though. Their daughter really liked animals. I eventually came across boxes of family pictures, and I sat down to look at them. It took a long time, but I was intrigued. The picture told a very different story than the little I knew about these people. They threw extravagant parties at their house, spoiled their daughter, and always looked presentable. There were many pictures of the house. Aside from the daughter's room, it was barely recognizable. The walls were mostly white and their rooms clean. They held many events there, from costume to birthday parties to recitals and charity dinners, and also had pictures of animals, dogs, cats, birds, horses, and snakes. They took their dogs everywhere. It seemed even to church and school. There was never pictures of more than 5 dogs, and during that time they looked fed. However, some of the animal pictures were definitely questionable. One had a dog sitting on a urine-soaked chair, while another showed the daughter holding up a Yorkie who had obviously just given birth. The pictures raised more questions than answers. I was quite surprised by it all, because this was not how I imagined animal hoarders. I imagined them to be reclusive, lonely and unclean, not a family of wealthy social partygoers. At this point you may be thinking I'm the creepy one looking through the stuff of a random family and wishing I could learn everything about them. But I was becoming obsessed and really wanted to dive into this mystery and figure it all out. I actually ended up messaging the daughter over social media, and after our correspondence a few times, she told me pretty much the story, which I'm going to share with you now. The wife was living a relatively normal, social life until disaster struck. Her brother overdosed and died. Within 2 months of that, both of her healthy parents died as well. The daughter said they died of heartbreak. This woman had lost her brother and 2 parents within a very short period of time, and started hoarding animals to fill the void. Based on what I know, I suppose the dogs were never fixed, as they kept on having puppies, and this kind of emotional trauma is common in animal hoarders. The daughter still claimed it was blown out of proportion, and started saying she was disgusted and stayed out of the situation as much as possible. She did develop a drug habit due to the stress of the incident, but has since found healthier ways of coping. I don't think her and her mother are terrible people. They just dealt with their issues in a very bad way. That being said, her husband, a doctor, watched idly as his wife had a complete mental breakdown for years, hoarding animals, possession, carcasses, and making their house unlivable, driving their daughter away, and much more. Apparently he was just too supportive, and even though he was a competent doctor, he let her get away with terrible stuff without intervention. The dogs were eating each other because they were starving to death. The house was extremely hazardous, and who knows what else was going on. I actually was lucky enough to arrange me meeting them. It turns out that the husband received only a $200 fine, and the wife was sentenced to 840 hours of community service and pleaded guilty to 1 count of aggravated cruelty to animals. The weird thing is, though, that the doctor claimed he didn't know or have the funds to get a lawyer, and he ended up getting a state one. I went to his practice, and she was the receptionist, him being the doctor, in a very dark and shady office. I actually tried to get an appointment, and went there twice. The place was shambles, horrible and decrepit on the inside. The wife, who was the receptionist, was honestly rude and looked a bit dead inside. The husband appeared to be in another world, unless I started speaking about animals. It was very strange. I don't know if their issues ever got fixed, but it's sad to see that what used to be such a great and wonderful life evaporated and became a hell on Earth. I really feel sorry for all those poor animals who suffered their mistreatment.
The streets of the Lower East Side of New York City in the early 80s were usually a dream for your typical heroin addict, of which there were roughly 1 million at the time citywide. A simple walk from Avenue B to 2nd to 3rd Street would usually permit you to pass at least 5 drug dealers or spots where you could buy heroin or cocaine. But this night was different. My friend Mario and I were going to cop some dude at around 9:30. The police presence was heavy and things were generally shut down. As you walked those streets, you encountered other junkies from all classes and backgrounds, all caught up in the heat of finding the needed fix. We decided to check out the Original. This was a spot in which a lot was once a building but had been demolished, and there was only rubble surrounded by huge piles of debris. The way this spot worked was in the dead of night you stumbled into this hellhole and waited for someone to line up. That meant service was coming. Insofar as some nasty junkie didn't try to rob or beat you as you waited in the darkness. This night you could feel the air, how palpably the tension grabbed you by the belly. There must have been 25 people all there to cop the toot, who then announced the arrival of the dealer and directed people, kept disappearing, looking nervously over his shoulder. Then he vanished, and we all didn't know what would come next. Several times we heard the scream, "Va Hondo," which meant police, and it meant scram. We kept running out of the lot and congregating back there after 10 minutes, and the crowd grew to about 40. Unlike other establishments, which were often holes in the walls of abandoned buildings, Original just had a wall that everyone lined up against like a firing squad. The dealer would run down and start serving both ends of the line if you were lucky. Sometimes only one would come down the Offer Express service for a fee. Pay $5 and you get served sooner. That night was moonless, and this was becoming a daunting process. Finally, all of us mulling around heard, "Line up!" People jostled one another to form a line. And there we all were. Nothing. No one was coming. The most hopeful waited anyway, and that night it was everyone. Suddenly I heard a loud boom. I turned in the direction and saw a man waving a pistol with a chrome-plated reflector on the single high crime lamp that was maybe 20 yards away. Boom, he shot again. He ran down the pile of debris, followed by his assistant. Everyone faced the wall. He and his helper then started to rob everyone stuck there. He was actually a bad cop from 8th Precinct, as I found out later. Like a cop, each person was lined up and asked for their wallet, and sometimes he asked for their ID. He grabbed the wallet, pulled out the cash, and now Mario had my money. He was going to be the drug buyer that night, so when they got to me I said, "I don't have any money. My partner down the line has it." He raised the pistol like he was going to hit me with it, but didn't, just showing frustration. Suddenly, boom. He fired and yelled for everyone to get out fast. To my right, a pile of debris and garbage about 10 feet high to my nearest exit point. I scrambled onto it, hoping to surmount it and get the hell out of there. Yet I couldn't quite do that. I was caught hanging by my feet. I knew that Mario had gotten away before the pigs corralled everyone, so there was still hope, but damn, I couldn't get over it. There was another pistol discharged from behind me, and I was up and over the obstacle in a second. I checked myself for bullet holes and went down the street looking for Mario. We were not deterred. There was a spot on East 3rd called Executive. It's a building that had mostly been gutted by fire. The entrance had a tout and we went in. There was no electricity anymore, but there were candles lit on the dilapidated stairs leading up to our hopes. We went up one flight, then another, where everything smelled of char. Finally, another set of stairs. It was so dark except for 1 or 2 candles every 15 feet or so. Now here was the dealer. How many? But before he could finish, we again heard the cry of alarm from below. He scuttled into the darkness. There were maybe 15 buyers up there with me and Mario. What they did intimidated me to this day. In near pitch blackness, people moved through the hole of a fallen wall onto a wooden or concrete beam that connected the buildings. These buildings were about 1 foot wide, maybe 14 inches, all in darkness. Mario took this route. I saw people rushing for their arms extended across the girder, but it wasn't for me. I started searching for a hiding place. As I did so, I could hear the cops laughing as they discovered people, and I also heard screams of pain and the occasional loud thwack. I saw in the shambles of a room a bathtub filled with plaster, and decided I was going to have a plaster bath. I tried to cover myself in the tub so no one would see me, but I wasn't successful. As the cops hit the 4th floor, I heard a very distinct jovial voice saying, "Well, hello there." I was petrified. They told me to get up. They seemed to be in a good mood. The 2 of them asked me some questions and wanted to look at my ID. I was shaking, expecting blows, but they merely told me to get down from where I came, and I happily obliged. I went home, Mario had my money, and I prepared for a night of withdrawal symptoms. Luckily, Mario was a friend and showed up with a few bags of dope later. That was a hellish night I'd rather forget.
Hey guys, it's Mort here. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate everyone being here, and well done for making it to the end of the video. I hope you liked it. You know what to do if you did. Likes are really appreciated, subscribing even more so, and leaving a comment does go a long way. A huge thank you as always to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. You guys are amazing, and if you are one or would like to be one, you get some exclusive content every once in a while. A few days ago, I put up an exclusive track for you guys, so feel free to have a listen if you are so inclined, so thank you. Well, I'm going to be doing another video on Thursday, so I really hope to see you there, but if you want more Mort, in the meantime, you can check out more stuff, which is on screen now. Take care. Stay awesome. See you in the next one.